Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center for GoLocal Live. It's 3 o'clock. I'm your host, Rachel Nunes. I'm here with my first guest of a very full hour. It's Valerie Endress. She's here from Rhode Island College to help us break down all the crazy things going down in Rhode Island politics, a little bit of national politics. It's been a crazy week.
It sure has been.
So welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So we're about 3 weeks out from Rhode Island's primary, the latest in the country. We're finally there. So where are we at right now in primary season?
Well, in some ways it's a little bit difficult to tell because we don't have as much polling data as we may have in other areas of the country. So on top of that, we have a number of uncontested races, and so that takes away from the tension and excitement of the primary. But it still is marked at the beginning of marks the beginning of the campaign season, and so that in itself becomes really important.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the biggest issues that's been raised ahead of this primary is the lack of debates between on both sides, especially in the governor's race. That there just really hasn't been much. And we spoke a little bit with Patricia Morgan in the past, and she was saying how she, as a candidate, it's very important to get your ideas out there and to show the differences in policy. And coming from an outsider standpoint looking in, and why are they so important to the state, to the people, and to the process?
Well, there's a number of reasons. I can talk later about why probably they have chosen not to debate. But there are important functions to debates. And one that's little known is that debates have a tendency to freeze the campaign until they have the debates themselves, which means that the voters suspend their feelings about the candidates, particularly the undecided, until they watch them in a debate. Without a debate, you just get little dribs and drabs of the candidates. They're more stylized in their talk. When you're talking one-to-one to a person, if they disagree with you, you can walk away without a lot of publicity. And so we learn a lot less about the candidates. We learn a lot less about their policy stance unless we actually have a debate. And Patricia's right, they do contribute to the democratic process. And it didn't used to be that we expected debates, but these days we do.
And so from a candidate's standpoint, does it make more sense to not have a debate and risk maybe having your opponent say something stronger or paint you in a bad light? Or does it make more sense to get out there and say, this is what I'm about?
Almost always the incumbents are in the driver's seats on debates, or the better known candidate or an office holder. And that's what we've seen happen in true to form in this election. So if from the consultant's perspective, it's a logical move for the governor not to have debates because her whole record is under scrutiny. And unlike her opponents, Matt Brown, who's been out of the state for over a decade, what they will talk about is her record, and that puts her on the defensive. And so we see that often incumbents, and it's also an indication, or it could be an indication, that the internal polling numbers are such that she doesn't feel as if she has to debate. And if you have a close election, you'll almost always see the incumbent want to debate. But from the campaign's perspective, the governor campaign's perspective, what it really does is raise the profile of Matt Brown. And of course, she doesn't want to do that. Also, if they suspect that the person might be a good debater or a better debater, they'll back away from the debates.
And do you think the whole Paw Sox going to Worcester, the kind of failed deal, do you think that has weighed into it at all? Do you think the governor's maybe afraid that that's going to come up and fall on her shoulders?
Well, I would probably think no more than than some of the other issues that come up, whether it's looking at the UHIP issues, the Division of Motor Vehicles. There's a whole host of, if you've been governor for that long, you're going to see a lot of issues that will crop up. And Rhode Islanders aren't shy about talking about what they don't like. And so I would say Paw Sox probably doesn't figure in that, and I imagine they made the decision before the final decision about the Paw Sox.
And so looking at the Republican side as well, why do you think Alan Fung has also been so reticent to engage in a debate?
I think he has internal polling numbers that tell him that he doesn't have to. I could be wrong about that, but that's usually a pretty big indicator. Also, what happens in a primary debate is that if you choose to debate your opponent, what you're doing in essence is giving away your strategies, your major themes, and your performance in the debate. And so if the governor chooses not to debate, then certainly you're not going to see Alan Fung debate. Also, there's this probably discomfort there about how to handle what's happening on the national level. You know, what do you do when Donald Trump is in the news every day and most of it is negative, and you're from the Republican Party? You know, and Charlie Baker in Massachusetts has done a really good job separating himself, and he saw the necessity early to do that. Alan Fung has been more reluctant to talk about that, which leads to Rhode Islanders not knowing where he stands or assume that he supports the president. And all of that leads to greater cynicism for the public. When they don't have debates, they don't have a chance to judge the candidates against each other. And you know, what's interesting is that my research is on debates, and I ran a longitudinal study in 2014, and where we see the likely matchup that will happen this year with Raimondo versus Fung. And one of the things that was really interesting, and I've been doing this since 2004, is that this was the debate in which Rhode Island citizens really questioned the trustworthiness, how candid they were, the truthfulness, and transparency of both of the candidates. And that was after viewing the debates live. And usually they're excited about being there. And what happened is, and that was our first indication of cynicism that would dog both of the candidates, you know, Fung in Cranston and Raimondo at the gubernatorial level. And there's not been a lot to change that since that time.
So if they are the primary winners, do you think another Raimondo Fung debate is likely?
I would assume so. You know, they may turn down the primary debates because they don't want to give away their strategy, but it would be very difficult to turn down general election debates. If I were a campaign consultant, I probably would argue on both sides to do as many debates as possible in whatever forums you can, because that mitigates against a bad or poor performance. If you only have 2 premier debates, then what it does is put a lot of pressure on the candidates.
Raises the stakes.
Yeah. So I would assume after the primary, my recommendation would be they get out there, they challenge each other to debates. Because I think the Rhode Island citizens do deserve to hear their policy differences, and they really haven't had the opportunity to do that.
Well, it will be very, very interesting to see what happens after the primary. And so turning our focus a little bit more nationally, it's been an absolutely wild week in politics. And so talking a little bit about, we had Cohen and Manafort and all of that, how does that impact Rhode Island?
Well, it does in a number of ways. And Rhode Island has been slow to crawl out of the recession. and people are still hurting in Rhode Island. And it is one of the more cynical states in terms of the citizens and their view against politics. This doesn't help that process. It doesn't help young people to go into the political process. So from that very local level, it certainly does. And the trust or lack of trust that you have of national politicians, because it's not only the presidency, it's Congress too. You know, when are the days when we used to talk about policy and legislation? We just don't do it anymore. It's the latest of what's happening in the Trump administration. For ill or for good, that's what we're talking about. And so it takes the focus away from people's real lives. And they're wondering, what is the federal government going to do for them? And the federal government has to work very closely with the state government. So in some ways, it puts it in a state of paralysis. We're not seeing a lot of movement in the federal government to help Rhode Islanders, and Rhode Islanders still need help.
Absolutely. And so do you think these issues will also trickle down into our election as well? I know you mentioned the issues with the gubernatorial candidates, but just for House and town council and smaller elections as well.
Well, and I hadn't mentioned the lieutenant governor's race yet, and that's getting some national attention because many people see it as a bellwether and the possibility of a break for a progressive candidate to gain statewide office. So that McKee and Regenberg matchup is rather interesting. And I think what will happen and what trickles down from the federal level is the rise of progressives. You know, how strong are they going to be in this election? And how are Republicans going to overcome some of the problems that they have in image because of the national or the Trump administration? So and also it's going to impact turnout. And we don't know which way that's going to go, right? Is it going to bring more people to the midterms, to vote in the midterms? And we'll get a glimpse of that in this primary campaign, particularly, or in this primary vote, particularly with Rhode Islanders.
That does seem to be one of the big themes of this primary race is there's just a whole bunch of progressive candidates who are coming in, progressive incumbents who they really seem to be making a big push here in Rhode Island. And do you think that will have any indication of how things will be nationally, or maybe the other way around, like national politics are affecting locally?
I think it actually will, and we're seeing a number of progressives who have gained seats in the last election in the General Assembly, and we'll see if that trend continues. And what it will do, though, is, or likely to do, is that we're losing our moderates on both sides. And there's in many ways difficult to find a moderate Republican. And with the rise of the progressives, you're going to see more of a push away from centrist Republicans, which in many ways have controlled the states for years. And we've seen some of the battles with Mattiello on this issue. Is he truly a Democrat in the national sense as opposed to the Rhode Island sense? And we see that with a lot of Democrats in Rhode Island, and we have traditionally. Mm-hmm. So a push by the progressives can split the party in some ways, or it can move the centrists further left if they can get a foothold.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating
it sure
primary election. We're all waiting with bated breath to see what happens. What's going to be the matchup for governor? Who's going to be coming into our seats in Rhode Island? It's going to be a fascinating
That's right. Stay tuned. Sure. Stay tuned.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Valerie Endress. We really appreciate your insight, helping us break down everything that's happening both here in Rhode Island and nationally as well. So we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure, Rachel.
And we'll be right back with our next guest here on Go Local Live.